Heavens to Murgatroyd! The latest installment in the Rageaholic movie review series is longer overdue than Charlie Sheen's alimony. More to the point, remember during our last foray into the Delphic expanse of 80s action machismo that is Commando, when I prefaced the video in question by saying this?
Previously during the investigation.
We've plowed headlong through the feckless filmography of some of the greatest piles of steely-jawed musculature that personifies the entirety of the 1980s. Stallone, Norris, Seagal, Thor, Ventura, Lundgren, and, of course, the apotheosis of all things manly, Kristen Kruk.
Stay with it.
Whoa, hold the fucking phone, me! We haven't tackled all the major action stars yet, not even almost. Where's Eastwood? Where's Jet Li? Where's Bronson? Where's Jackie Chan? Chow Yun-Fat? Vin Diesel? Jason Statham? Nah, I'm just yanking your crank. Jason Statham will grow a full head of hair before I devote half a fucking minute to covering that conglomeration of cockney conceit. Alas, with an excess of virtues, my only recourse is to consult at last the Wheel of Zeal. Sweet, thinly veiled Belgian accents, it's Jean-Claude Van Damme. And if you're keen to forage in the remains of what's left of this man's career, then amidst the rubble, you'd be remiss to fail to acknowledge 1992's tour de forceful letdown that is Universal motherfucking Soldier. Van Damme? Check. Lundgren? Check. WCW Zeus? Czechoslovakian Wolfdog. Fuck, even casting the mom from Kazam as the love interest can't begin to fuck this movie up. There's enough testosterone in a single cell of this film to spawn 15 Rachel Maddows. But enough about Rachel Maddow's fully formed penis. Set phasers to Universal goddamn Soldier. Finally, a film that sets the record straight about the Vietnam War. It wasn't an asinine clusterfuck wherein a cabal of Western capitalists attempt to quell the plague of communist insurgents. It was about a bunch of steroidal, flagrantly European actors and Dolph Lundgren badly masquerading as American soldiers telling a backwards-ass Asian country how to live. Hey, if you've ever found yourself directly behind a Vietnamese woman in LA rush hour traffic, you can already relate. Dolph Lundgren's prescription is a .44 caliber lobotomy. Van Damme's prescription is a slap fight in the rain. Instead, they both opt to mirror their future career arcs by falling the fuck dead on the goddamn spot. The US government, represented here by a gravel-gargling beret with the ethical boundaries of a Kevorkian child porn merchant, elects to put the vets on ice, bringing the career arc analog full circle when Lundgren and Van Damme emerge from cryostasis 3 decades later in a vain attempt to fucking matter. As motherfucking cyborgs. You see, cyborgs were to the 90s what ninjas were to the 1980s.
Ninjas!
In fact, in most films, everything after the word cyborg was an abject superfluity. Why does a man's hair need blonde highlights, you ask? Cyborgs! Why do lanky suburban white kids need military cargo pants? Cyborgs, bro! Why does Jay-Z have a career? Motherfucking cyborgs, man! Welcome to 90s logic. The Universal Soldiers, like the actors that play them, have been wiped of all individuality, rendered effectively mute, and pumped with enough roids to drop Scott Steiner, unleashed on the Hoover Dam in glorious Arizona, home of Rob Halford, Alice Cooper, and the most humble, unassuming Adonis to ever grace modern video game reviewing. And Razor Fist, they effectively purge every sentient life form in the Sonoran Desert from the face of motherfucking existence. When confronted by reporters as to the identities of the mysterious mechanized murder machines, they're treated to the following response.
As to the identity of the Unisols, that still remains classified.
But Colonel,
these men have families, and I will not do anything to jeopardize their lives.
Wow, there's that Walter Cronkite spirit. Discontinue their entire line of questioning after being handed a stern none ya business. But at least one journalist is doing the job she was fired from 5 fucking minutes ago. This woman has the biggest heaving balls in this entire movie, and not just because of Van Damme's steroid-induced testicular atrophy either. She sneaks onto a top-secret government testing site, pops the lid on one of the beer coolers, and finds the only six-pack is attached to a humongous fucking dude. Does she flee? Does she cower? Does she even bother to crouch behind cover to avoid surveillance? Fuck and no. She brandishes her camera and squeezes off enough shots to make Peter North lime green with envy. But one guy who needn't be envious is Solid Snake, because this woman has the espionage skills of a Sherman tank. Of course, this immediately draws the ire of the power team, who promptly disembark to rid the world of the peerless danger presented by a 95-pound woman with a Nikon. With stealthy discretion, they fling her car off a fucking ramp so it can inconspicuously capsize from 30 feet in the goddamn air. So wait, you sent 3 guys into a concrete megafortress to murder a well-armed and at least sufficiently trained militia, but for one loopy slag armed with a lipstick tube you unleashed the entire beef brigade? But when Dolph Lundgren blows the cinematographer's head off his shoulders, Van Damme spontaneously decides to abscond with Margaret Horkwhite in his Chevy Bronco, which, like the man's career, promptly runs out of gas. That is until this shit happens. Belgian waffles! That car is officially moving faster than this film's plot. After pulling into pendulous Ballsack, Arizona and exchanging sweaty glances with the innkeeper, they rent a room where Jean-Claude Van Damme reverts to his natural state of nude. After collapsing from the heat, it emerges that in order to maintain his accelerated cybokinetic sci-fi bullshit metabolism, he needs to be a walking fucking ice house. Lundgren and the Beef Brigade roll into town in what appears to be the trailer from Jurassic Park: The Lost World, at which point Universal Soldier remembers that it's a fucking action movie. Will our gallant hero leap out of the window, bound through the door, crawl through an air vent, try bash through a wall like the Kool-Aid man on bath salts? And again. And again. At least until our bulging Belgian finds himself face to face with his mortal enemy, Mortarwork! And may I field a spontaneous question? When in the history of anything has the circle the building and empty 7 fucking clips into it with no rhyme or fucking reason tactic ever goddamn worked in an action film? They tried it on Stallone in Cobra. He wound up murdering the entire state of California. They tried it on Arnold in Commando. He single-handedly massacred every brown person in South America. What makes Dolph Lundgren think this is the tactic to finally drop the guy who can kick a fucking building down? So naturally, they slip the net and pop it into the nearest shit heap where Greta Van Susteren finally brokers the query on absolutely everyone's mind.
Where are you from anyway? Are you from France or Canada or... I mean, I figured you gotta be French or something because of your accent.
What accent?
If it seems like Roland Emmerich just deliberately wrote a plot hole into his fucking movie and draped it in a hot pink fucking bow, that's only because he goddamn did. The two pull into a gas station attended by a Sonoran inebriate, and this shit happens.
There must be a tracking device on me.
Well, what do you want me to do about it?
Look for something unusual. Something hard.
So the thing about Van Damme is that if it's physically possible for the man to reach his button fly, he's already naked. Over the course of his filmography, this man has flashed more ass than Shawn Michaels on a Grand Canyon burro ride. I'm dead fucking serious. Right now, at this very moment, even as I speak these words and the miracle of broadband communications beams them directly into your grade school, somewhere, somehow, Jean-Claude Van Damme is nude.
Stay in shape, don't you?
It's a law of nature, no less immutable than gravity. Next to unemployment, it's the closest thing to his natural state. But enough about Van Damme's suspiciously well-shaven ass crack. She yanks the tracker from his sphincter just in time for the pectoral posse to pull up in their turtle van. With tactical acumen rivaled only by the Black Knight from Monty Python, they charge the empty building, triggering a gasoline trap that turns most of the fucking unit into Kingsford briquettes in the process. With the coast now clearer than his ass's complexion, Van Damme hops into his car in a rapid attempt to jibbity fuck! After the only backseat encounter that didn't end with Van Damme paying 2 decades of child support, he slams on the brakes and puts Lundgren through a windshield that's at least half as thick as his cranial ridge. But despite the fact that he's basically a Swedish Pachycephalosaurus, the impact evidently jostled something fucking loose because subsequent to the crash, this happens.
GR13. I said it's over.
My name is Sergeant Andrew Scott.
Meanwhile, at a nearby Five and Downer, Van Damme is learning how to eat, but evidently not how to fucking pay for it.
The food is good.
Fucking it is. The question is, How are you going to pay for it?
Let's see, slovenly borderline obese cook, Belgian kickboxer with buttocks toned enough to crack walnuts? Who the fuck could possibly win this altercation? If you think he's dangerous now, you should see him with a white flag. A sentiment that Van Damme evidently shares as he's bought Murphy Brown her very own Greyhound ticket without so much as a complimentary dicking. Oh, will she, won't she? It's like Casablanca with Van Damme's naked ass. That is, until they're apprehended by a sea of mustaches. Carted away in a prison bus, running a fever and chained to their seats, things looked decidedly bleak for Bonnie and Claude when suddenly, Lundgren! Well, it's time to dust off the Rageaholic's chase scene scale from 1 to death race, and with a mid-air grenade fight, a dead driver, mid-air flips, and T-bone collisions, this chase scene is among the fucking elite. But it doesn't ascend to the death race sphere until it ends in a massive explosion at the base of the Grand fucking Canyon. That is how you end a chase scene, with the bad guys splattered at the base of a chasm as cavernous and vast as Colin Moriarty's ignorance. Murphy Brown then promises to bring him home to parents who, like the modern movie-going audience, have assumed he was dead for the past 30 fucking years. But as we all know, you can't turn your back for 5 minutes without Lundgren kidnapping your folks and jungling your girlfriend in a barn.
Zero, can you hear me? Get your ass out here! We have some unfinished business, you and me!
Van Damme obliges, and so begins some of the finest cinematic combat ever depicted in the entire decade of the 90s. But like most Franco-Belgian conflicts, it's also one-sided. After being handed his magnificent powdered ass, it's time for Lundgren to truly cross the Rhineland.
Run! Run! Run!
With that, Van Damme does the one thing his home country never could. No, not inventing Sephiroth's sole character trait. I'm talking about standing on his hind legs and beating some ass. Swedish ass, but still. After a brief flurry of kick-assery, the superior strength of his opponent has Van Damme on the ropes again. That is, until he Sam Fishers the super soldier smoothie out of Lundgren's vest pocket and takes the ultimate warrior road to fame and fortune. Remember, children, the moral of the story is, drugs are good and will help you win fights. Van Damme unleashes the most merciless act of Belgian violence since King Leopold III nearly yanked that shoulder out of its socket while hoisting that white flag in 1940. And, well, fuck me! Dolph Lundgren can act his way out of a barn. But let's be real here. The moment you saw the rusty spikes on that wood chipper, you and all the residents of Fargo, North Dakota knew exactly how this shit was gonna end.
You're discharged, Sarge.
Are you okay?
Got better.
Where is he?
Around.
Riddled with shrapnel and in all likelihood full-on concussed, they embrace and presumably engage in a bloody mud-encrusted fuck-off right there on the Louisiana swamp floor, and the peasants fucking rejoice. I've probably uttered the words Van Damme at least 12 billion and a half butt fucking times by this point, but for the purposes of this review, I'll imbibe one last time. Jean-Claude Van Damme, you are the motherfucking man. Now conclude your little pissing match with Steven Seagal so we can finally see a proper Expendables movie. You can compliment his hair plug ponytail, he can help you wax your ass, I give less than a fuck how you do it, but do it. I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.